Okay, howdy everyone. Happy Thursday. This week is reusable components, imperative React, and the UseRef hook. Um, as always, I would like to start just opening the floor if anyone has anything they want to talk about, questions, concerns, things worth discussing. With whatever time we have left, we will jump back into our demo project. We're going to build a toast widget, which you may not have heard of by name, but you've definitely seen them before on other websites. I think it'll be a good opportunity to get some practice using the UseRef hook, and also understanding why we might want to use a context rather than passing state directly from component to component. So we get some practice doing both of those. But first things first, if anything is going on that someone wants to talk about, now's the time. All right, I'm going to take that silence as nothing super pressing, which is always good. Feel free to speak up at any time and interrupt. And we will jump straight into our project for today. All right, so with that said, I'm going to give everyone the link if you have not been following along but would like to. So this is a link to our project that we've been working on. I pushed last week's code. I believe it was last week, this week 4, lifting state and props handling, and then React hooks. So this is last week's code plus one extra commit here, where we're just setting up the basic widget with HTML and CSS. I think I got a comment from someone a couple of weeks ago that it's more helpful to be able to focus on the cool React and JavaScripty things rather than spending a bunch of time during these sessions on CSS, which I totally agree. And so I just put together a very simple little widget and we'll do all the cool stuff today. So if you want to follow along, feel free to clone this, or if you already have it cloned, just pull down the most recent commits on the master branch and I'll be good to go. So find my project. I'm on the master branch, we'll get pull, should already have everything. And you should see this setup basic toast with no behavior as the most recent commit. So what is a toast? Well, we run our application. We will see a toast in the bottom right corner here. It's just a little banner that pops up in the corner of your screen that just gives a message to a user and then disappears after a couple of seconds. So usually this is like some sort of confirmation message. Maybe you just signed up for a service and you've been redirected to the login form. Then maybe we want to show a toast that just says your sign up was successful, please log in. And then they can log in with the credentials that they just used.
Is that considered a pop-up?
Say it again.
Is that considered a pop-up?
Yeah, it's kind of a pop-up in that it pops up on your screen. I would normally think a pop-up is like something that shows in the middle of your screen that you then interact with. Like if I'm opening like a settings menu or something like that, but I think for all intents and purposes, it's pop-up. All right, so we're gonna build this widget into something a little bit more cool. Right now, it's just a block on our page. I made this toast.jsx component that takes in the text that goes on the toast and a color. And then it just creates a little container with an H2 that displays the text. There's a little bit of CSS here, nothing super complicated. We're using this position fixed to put it on a fixed position in the screen such that when I scroll my page, it's never going to move. It's always going to be in the bottom corner there. And we use this bottom and right to say, I want you to be 30 pixels from the bottom of the screen and 30 pixels from the right, and some other miscellaneous stuff down here. And where we're using it right now is in this app.jsx. We're just throwing it somewhere in our application, not particularly caring where, and it's just going to show up as well as all of our other content. So here are some things that I would like to do with this toast over the next hour. We are going to make this customizable. It should not always be showing hello world. It should not always be green. I want to be able to show my toast in specific events across my whole site. So if I click add to cart here, I should see a toast that tells me you successfully added 3 items to your cart. And similarly, maybe if I click clear down here, then it's going to give me a toast that says you cleared out this item from your cart. Just a way to communicate to the users that something has happened. Our website isn't complicated enough yet to do anything more cool than that. So we'll leave it there for now. And then another thing that we probably want to do is we don't want this showing up all the time. I would like this to default to be off. And then when one of those events happens, maybe we show it for like 3 or 4 seconds, make sure that the user has time to look at it, and then it should disappear again. We don't want to keep it on the screen forever. Ideally, this would be with a really cool animation, like maybe it slides onto the screen or at least it like fades in and fades out. I'm not going to do that today. You guys can customize the CSS however you desire. But for our purposes, we're just going to have it show up on the screen and then disappear. Cool with everyone? Any questions before we get started? All right, sweet deal. So with that said, if I have my toast here, and this is a component that I can go into, well, I need some way to change the text and the color of this toast. And I want to be able to do this anywhere on my site, which is why I put it up here at the very top level in my app.jsx. So I need some way that I can change this text and this color from anywhere in my site very easily. Anyone have any like preliminary suggestions about how we might go about accomplishing this? Maybe I want to be able to edit it from inside my cart display and also from inside my table or something like that.
Can you make it a reusable component?
We could make it a reusable component where like each component has its own toast that it can then choose to go on the screen if we want. I would prefer to keep this as just a single component, given that we should only ever see one toast. And it's not really a property of another component. So we're going to try and keep it as just one. And maybe this particular instance of this component, we're going to change the text and the color whenever from anywhere else. But that's a good suggestion. I like that suggestion. If I want to be able to have this data be editable, such that maybe it starts as hello world and then later on, if I click a button, the thing is going to change. Where would be a good place to store the current text that's on the toast? I would say maybe
In a use state?
yeah, exactly. In a state variable. We could put our state variable in app .jsx here. Maybe toast text, set toast text, use state. And this could be an empty string, and then maybe we have a color. Toast color, set toast color. So on and so forth. And maybe we could make this green by default, and we could make this hello world by default. And then instead of passing the text, then we go in here and we use our state variable instead. And similarly here. Cool. And we have these setter functions. So if I wanted to go into my cart display and when I click on this button down here, be able to change my toast, how would I need to do that with our current setup? Go for it. Someone raise their hand.
Oh, I had a question. It's a
Sure.
little, I'm trying to figure out when I would use a toast. I was on an app today and it gave directions like, oh, this part is for adding stuff here, this part. So it was kind of like taking you through how to use the app. Would you use a toast for that? You know, one of those like when you start on a new app, it'll say something
Yeah,
like
like a little
click here.
tutorial or something.
Yeah, a tutorial. So would you use a toast for like a tutorial maybe?
I think you could. Um,
Okay.
tutorials could be literally anything you want. I personally expect a toast to just be like a quick little message that just indicates that something happened. Maybe there was an error on the site that you want the user to understand, like, hey, we encountered an error. We're really sorry. Can you try it again? Maybe I would show a little message down there that literally says exactly that. Or in the case of I successfully signed up, you need some way to tell your user, okay, you signed up, it worked. We need you to log in with those credentials before we can do anything. So I would generally keep it to some smaller messages. You can like show some messages to indicate certain things on your website. Maybe like in this example where we have like a very generic um, what they call a snack bar in Material UI. But like this is white, it doesn't indicate that something was successful or something that failed. And therefore, this is just informational. And that would be a great place to do it. Or maybe you want to keep the text for your tutorial up a little bit longer. In that case, maybe you want some widget that's not going to go away in 5 seconds. Maybe like it's something that is a pop-up and you have an X button on it. That could also be a good candidate for using a toast or something like that.
How did you get to the documentation in Material UI?
I literally just searched for MUI toast and it's the first thing that comes up.
Okay. I don't see it on the website, the documentation, but that's okay. That's okay. Never mind.
All right, cool. All right, so we have our toasts, we have our state variables, and then maybe I would like pass my setter into my cart display and into my table. But the problem here is that we could use this toast literally anywhere in our website. I want literally even inside of this like button here, if I click add to cart, that should be able to set up our toast. Well, how do I get to it? Well, I have to go into my table and then I go into my product listing and then I go into my quantity selector. And then in here, I have that button add to cart. So that's passing, we'd have to pass the setter function down like 4 levels of our application in order to actually use it. And in a bigger website, it could be like hundreds of components, and that would be terrible. So there's a really great suggestion here that maybe we should make it a custom hook. And I would agree, we need to do something like that instead. One thing to remember about a custom hook is if I were to declare a function use custom hook, and then I have set state or my state, set my state, use state, and maybe this starts at 0, and then we return my state and set my state. Anywhere I use this hook, we are going to get a different piece of state uh, for that component. So every single quantity selector that I create, if I call use custom hook here, const my state, set my state, we are going to get a different state variable. And I could kind of put like the rendering of my toast in here if I wanted to, but there's not really a great place to put it. Our custom hooks are really just for state and effects around that state. And it needs to be something that is unique to each item. I would argue the toasts on our screen should only be showing one thing at a time. I have seen some websites where they show multiple toasts that go over each other. So maybe I have like my first toast, and then if I show another one right afterwards, then like another one will pop up over the top. In that case, maybe we could find a way to do that with custom hooks. I think I'm going to avoid doing that for now because I think that's going to get a little complicated. And rather, I'm going to suggest a very similar approach, but something a little bit different. So this custom hook here is a different piece of state for every component that is instantiated that calls that hook, which is not what we want. We want one toast and we just want to change what's on the toast from anywhere in our site. So rather, what we should be using here is we probably want to use a context. So I'm going to go in my hook section down here, and I'm going to call this toast context.jsx. And this is going to look very similar. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to create a toast context variable, which is create context. So this creates a brand new context item. We can give it a default value of some kind. I'm going to give it null. Usually this doesn't really matter. It just helps you, or it really just helps uh, your IDE infer what should be in here. But what a context is a single place or a single piece of state that can be shared to anywhere in your application without having to pass it down multiple components. So what would I maybe want to use from anywhere in my site, but I don't want to have to pass down setter functions every single component that I want to use it? Well, in our case, we have this toast, which has some text that is currently showing and some color that is currently showing. And I could put that in my app.jsx and pass the state variables and the setters down everywhere in my app, but that's going to get really nasty really quick. We're going to have so many properties to manage, it's going to be gross. So rather, what I would like to do is create a context where we have a thing called a provider. A provider is like one instance of the state inside of this context, and it provides that state to anyone in the component tree that wants it. You don't have to pass down properties from anywhere in the component tree under that provider. You are allowed to say, give me whatever the current value of this context is. And that's really powerful. We can have multiple providers in our app. And then when I call UseContext later, which says, get me the closest value, it's going to pick whichever one. It goes up the tree, and the first provider that it finds is going to use that state. So maybe I have a provider and this, let me make some comments here in hopes that it doesn't try and auto format. So if we had like a component tree here, and we say we have our app, and then in our app, we have our provider. And inside the provider, we have page 1, page 2, page 3. And then maybe in page 1, we have a provider number 2. And then we have some components. And if I call use context here, it's going to get me provider 2's state. But down here, if I have a component and I call use context, I should actually swap the arrow and the equal sign here. That would be less confusing. So if I call use context down here, it goes up the tree, and the first provider it finds is this provider number 1. And here, if it goes up the tree, it immediately finds provider number 2. So this is a way that we can pass data across our whole application very easily. It's a very powerful tool. You're going to use this for some very specific things. Other examples that I've seen is maybe you have like some theme information that your application is currently in dark mode or in light mode, and maybe your application treats certain things differently in those two different modes. So I probably want to pass that as a context value to say anyone in the tree can use the context to say, I'm currently in dark mode, do this one thing, or I'm in light mode, do this other thing. And we don't want to have multiple pieces of that state across our application, so we don't want to use a custom hook. Instead, we only want one source of truth for what is my current theme. Another thing that I see very often that is probably even more useful than that is an auth context. You can find tutorials out the wazoo on how to do authentication. But one thing you can do is you can have a context for your user to say, I'm going to let them log in or sign up. And once they've done that, they're going to get back a token. And this token is how they re-authenticate anytime they try and do anything else in the application. So if I have like a shopping app, I need them to log in first, but then in order to do anything else with our API, maybe they want to add something to like to their saved items that they really like. Or they actually want to buy something, that has to go through an API. In that case, they need a token to send with the request in order to tell the API, I am this person, I'm allowed to do this. And the API is, okay, sure, go for it. If they don't have the token, it's going to reject the request. So we have one context which holds that token and provides it anywhere in the website. And then if I have one specific component that's responsible for buying products, it can say, what is the current token? And just grab it and then send it along with whatever request it makes. And somewhere else in the app, we have another component that's also making requests and it can grab the token wherever it wants. So this is probably the most frequent usage that I've had personally, but there's plenty of others. Okay, we still haven't done shit. And so I'm going to keep writing. Actually, we'll keep this down here just in case anyone wants something. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to create a component here. We're going to call this toast provider, which is to say this is a component that provides some toast context to the rest of our app. And we're going to take that state and move it in here. And we'll just call it text since we're in a component that makes it clear we're talking about toast here. And the default is going to be nothing. And our color, set color, our default is going to be green. Cool. And so I can go into this app.jsx. And because this is a component, I'm going to take whatever is in this toast here. Yeah, we'll just take the content directly. And we'll say return, maybe we'll just copy in the whole thing. And I changed my mind. We're not going to leave both of these around.
Hey, you can make that div a fragment.
I can. In this case, I want to apply some styling to it. I would typically make it a fragment if I literally like don't care about it at all. It's just an empty box. So in this case, because I want to apply some styling, so I'm going to keep it as a div here. But I'm going to actually take this out, this toast provider. And we're going to move this into our toast.jsx here. So we're going to keep our context in this other file over here, our hooks directory. But then we're gonna keep the toast in our components folder since it's going to render some stuff to the screen. All right. So with that, we have our setters, we have our use state, and we have this toast provider. And I'm going to go into my app.jsx. And what I would like to be able to do here is use this div, which this one I'm going to turn into a fragment, like Sharice was saying, because there's no reason to keep it as a div. And we're going to use this toast provider. Oops, I don't think I exported it. Cool. So now we exported it. We go back in here. Provider. And this is going to be a component that takes other components inside of it. So how do we do this from inside of our toast provider? How do we let them know that my provider is going to have other React components inside of it? Well, the way that I'm going to do this is by passing a children property to our JSX here. So we have our props and we're going to pass children, which is a designated property. You cannot use this for your own purposes. This is reserved for components. And it is any JSX element that is positioned inside of the component when you actually declare it in another file. And we're just going to pass this through. So we're going to use now we're going to use a fragment as well to use our toast container. And then we're going to say, just render all the other children. I don't really care what you do with them. But this toast is going to be its own separate div, which has some stylings on it. Cool. Let's see if this worked. App.jsx, what is this getting mad about? Have some stuff we're no longer using. Our toast context. We're going to default export this toast context. We're going to use it in a second, but we're not using it yet. And then this is state setter functions that we're not using, which we're also not using yet. So let's go back in here. All right, nothing has changed. All we've done is move it to its own component. Now we're going to do the cool stuff. So for us to use this context, what we're going to do is we're going to declare a toast context dot provider. What is toast context? It's this create context that we did, and then we exported from a different file. Actually, this is really stupid. We're not going to make it a separate file. We're just going to put it together so that we can see everything at once. We can discuss the semantics about where this should live later. But for now, I just want everything to be very clear, and so we're going to put it all together.
Yeah, I like it when it's in one place.
Yeah, everyone has their own opinion about things. I tend to agree. I like to have everything together. All right, so we have this toast context. And then we have this context dot provider, which says set up an instance of something that is providing this state value in here. So we have this toast context dot provider, and we're going to tell what is it actually providing. So this value portion is like, what is the thing that is going to be accessible when I call UseContext from anywhere else in my app? The default is what we put up here. It doesn't really matter. We're going to say it's null. But
Is it
what
a
I'm going to
text?
go ahead.
Is it a text? Because you want to put a, well, I guess you already put the text in. Huh.
Yeah. We're actually not going to provide our state variables. Not exactly, because I don't really want someone to be able to set text or set color, or like we definitely don't need people to be able to read the text and the color. We do probably want them to be able to set it. Anywhere in my app, I should be able to set this toast should be yellow. This toast should have this text on it. Instead, I'm going to create some helper functions to do that. I think we kind of mentioned it in a previous week. I generally don't want to give access across my app to just the basic setter function. I want to give a more specific function that does not allow someone to throw in some garbage value that's going to throw our whole application in a rut.
Well, technically with the toast, do you want them to remove it like a pop-up where it's like, hi, thanks for logging in, then you click off of it?
Yeah, that
Or
could
are
be
you
another
gonna
thing.
do that after 10 seconds? Or technically when you log into Amazon, it'll say like wrong password and it'll stay up. But
Yeah, maybe
I
we
don't
could
know.
put like an X button on here inside of this toast that then sets some state variable to say make an empty toast, something like that. I definitely think we could do that. We're gonna let that be like a cool feature that you guys can do on your own because we're already gonna be short on time. But yes, I agree with you. That would be a great thing to do. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to declare if you ever use a toast that is provided by another library, they're probably going to give you like 3 or 4 functions. They're going to give you a success function, which is to say, show some message that indicates something went right. They're going to give you a warning. They're going to give you an error. And also maybe they give you just like an info level, just like show something. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't need to be like something was good, bad, or in the middle. So what I'm going to say is the success function is going to set my text to be green. Let's go pick some pretty colors here. I usually just Google RGB color picker. I think this is the green that I was using yesterday. It's left over, so I'm just going to use that. And we're going to set this hex code. And then maybe the success function takes in some text that we're going to show. New text. Ooh, this should be set color. and then set text to be my new text. And then we'll do the same thing for our warning and our error, except we'll change around the color. So let's go pick maybe a red. This one looks pretty good. There's no science here. Let's pick a color that looks good for you. And then we'll try yellow. Um,
Or blue.
yeah, for a warning, I'm probably gonna stick with a yellow or an orange. A blue might be good for like just like an info level, like nothing interesting is happening. Let's do that. We'll pick a good blue. I like sort of pastel-y colors a little bit. Cool. All right. And so what am I going to provide to people? I'm actually just going to give them all of these setter functions. And I'm going to give them an object that just has all these functions and they can use whichever ones they want. So we'll give them our success, our warning, our error, and our info functions. These are just references to the functions. We're not actually invoking them here, and someone else can invoke them somewhere else to update the state of this context. So let's try this. Let's go maybe um, into our cart display. And we said this button over here where when you clear a product should show a toast. So I want to call my toast dot maybe warning here, just to let them know cleared product with quantity dot product dot name from cart. All right, so this is the message we're going to show. But how do we actually get to that toast? Well, this cart display is under our app.jsx, and in our app.jsx, we have that toast provider. So this is the widget that we created. And inside of this widget, it renders, actually, we don't need a box here. I don't think it hurts anything, but it's not doing anything super useful. We have this actual like context provider, which is a React API. And then we render the actual toast on the screen and any other children that are passed into this component. And what childrens did we pass in there? Well, we passed the rest of our application, our table, and our cart display. So anywhere in my cart display, I can get that context. The way we do it is we call UseContext. And then which context? We're going to use that. What did we call it? We called it a toast context, which again, if I click on this, it's this create context call up here. This is like our master key for how do we actually get to that context or provide it. And then what does this give me back? Well, this gives me the value that I gave in this provider, which is all these different functions. And so I can destructure all of them. And now I have access to my success, my warning, my error, and my info functions. All right. So what am I going to do with this? I'm going to show my warning. And maybe we'll get rid of the rest of these since we don't need them. So my warning function is going to say cleared this item from the cart. Let's see if that works. I can add a bunch of stuff to my cart. I now have a big cart here. If I clear out these 11 items, sweet deal. So now our toast is yellow and it says cleared that item from our cart. Where else can we use this? Maybe let's go into our quantity selector. And we have this function update quantity. So our quantity selector is this whole widget right here where we can add and subtract. And then we click add to cart and it uses our custom hook that we created for the cart. Use cart. And then it calls this add quantity to product function. So we have set quantity and then uh, where's my submit button? Add to cart. And then we use this add quantity function. All right, so what do we want? I would like when they successfully add a quantity to the cart, maybe here we're going to get our toast again. And this time we'll get the success function. Use context or toast context. And we're going to call success and give it some message. Added to cart. And what is this going to do? So now if I add things to my cart, it goes back to green, added to cart. I clear it out, goes back to yellow, add some stuff back in, goes back to green. Sweet deal. That's exactly what we want. Let's do maybe one other thing so that we can use our error function somewhere. I think we should not let them put in an invalid number of items to the cart. So if they want to submit a new quantity, it needs to be a valid quantity. So what are we doing in this function before we update the quantity? We try and convert whatever it is to a number. This is going to be a string if it comes from this call right here, where our input is changing. Our input always stores things as a string. Down here, this is actually going to be a number because it's just using the state directly and then adding one to it, and state is a number. But it could be a string from this input. So we convert it to a number, and then if that fails, or if our quantity is less than 0, then we ignore it. It's not a valid quantity. So if I inspect my page and then I go in here and I try to go to -1, we're going to see this invalid quantity message in our console. But our console is not helpful. Our users aren't going to be looking at the console. They're not developers. They're just a bunch of shoppers. So
So can you
instead,
change it to be less than 0 or less than 100 or something?
yeah, like if they want to buy more than 100, that's probably an error. We could do that if we wanted to. Feel free to do that. Let's call our success function and oh no, we don't want success. We want our error function down here because this is a problem. They've done something bad. So we'll call error invalid quantity our new quantity and an exclamation point. Maybe we'll put this in single quotes. So now, instead of logging it to our console, now we have a red toast, invalid quantity. Sweet deal. Okay, let's do some other cool stuff. We got about 20 minutes. So we've got a pretty good understanding of our context here. I do want to talk about refs, but we're going to do one other thing first. I don't want this toast to always be showing. It doesn't need to be there. Eventually, I would like to clear this out after like 3 seconds of showing a toast. So let's maybe take out these defaults for our state so that we just have an empty thing for now. This is the color that I put in the CSS. But then separately, we need some way to identify when should this toast actually be showing or not. And I think it is probably easiest to just make this another piece of state, showing set showing, which is going to be false by default. And if we turn this to true, then we want to show this toast on our screen. So how are we going to do that? Well, we could just hide this widget if it's false. So we're going to throw in some JSX here and say if showing, then we're also going to render this div here. And if showing is not true, then the second half of the condition will not be executed. Since this is already false, it doesn't need to evaluate the second half. And so it's not going to include this div in our output. So what does this look like? Well, it's false by default, so there's no text down here. If I were to change that default to be true instead, well, now it is showing because that's our default. Cool. So we have a way of showing toast. Maybe on these functions, these success warning, error, and info functions, I need to call set showing and set it to be true. And same down here. So anytime that I want to execute my toast to show something, it's going to pop up on the screen. But we don't have any way to make it go away yet. We need some way to say after 3 seconds, go away and stop showing again. While we're here, I'm going to say this is a lot of duplicated code. I think what we should do is we should extract this to a helper function and then just call that helper function. So maybe we say show toast. What are we going to show? We're going to show some text. With a particular color. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to set our color to be whatever the color we passed in. We're going to set the text to be whatever text we passed in. And we're going to set showing to be true. And instead of all these other calls, we're just going to call show toast with our text and the specific color. One more. All right, sweet deal. So let's make sure this still works. Refresh my page, there's nothing there. I hit submit, it gives me that helpful toast. All right, last cool thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure that this toast goes away. So how do I say do something in 3 seconds in JavaScript? Does anyone know offhand what I need to call in order to do something after a delay?
They're like an auto hide.
Set timeout is what
Timeout.
I'm looking for here. So there's two like browser APIs that are really useful. Set interval, which executes a function every so often. So I can say log hello world to the console. And how often are we going to do this? Well, we're going to do this every 1,000 seconds. And so now, if I go in here, it's not running, but once that toast executes, hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world, every second. Similarly, we can call set timeout, which just does it once after a delay. So we want set timeout, do this after 1 second. Now, if I refresh my page and I execute my toast, after 1 second, it's going to do hello world, but it only does it once, and then it's gone. Let me check really quick if that was a question or a concern. Yeah, so set interval is if you want to do something over and over. And set timeout is if you want to do it exactly once. That's your difference. So we said after maybe 3 seconds, which is, this is always milliseconds. So 1,000 milliseconds in a second, and then 3 times that, we are going to hide our toast. We started showing it right here with set showing true. We can do the exact opposite with set showing false. So now if I execute my toast and then wait 3 seconds, it's gone. I can do it again, add it to cart, 3 seconds, and it's gone. I clear stuff out, 3 seconds, and it's gone. I do -1, 3 seconds, and it's gone. Sweet deal. We have a fully functioning toast widget at this point, which we have provided all the way across our whole site and disappears after 3 seconds. You could use some CSS to make it a very fancy animation. and make it look a little better than what it does right now. But it's functional for our purposes, which is great. It's mostly functional. There's one little bug here that I want to be aware of. So right now, my set timeout is being called along with state variables being set. What happens when I update a state variable? What happens to the component when the state changes? What does React do? Not a trick question. It causes our component to re-render, right? If I update my state variable, it's going to re-render this toast provider widget or component, whatever you want to call it. So when I call my state here, it's going to re-render and it's going to call this function again, which goes top to bottom and just does some stuff. So it takes in the properties, which is the children. It gets the current value of all of these state variables, which one or more of them have changed since the last render. And then it's going to call this function, success, warning, error, info, so on and so forth. And this is fine, but this timeout is lost. So this timeout is going to execute. It's going to tell the browser in 3 seconds, cancel me. But there's no way that I can tell at any point this timeout that it needs to stop because I don't have a way to get to that timeout after my component re-renders. So you might think, okay, so the set timeout returns an ID. Interval does the same thing. This is a unique identifier to this particular timeout. If I called set timeout again, it would be a completely different ID. And there's a function called cancel clear timeout. Same thing for clear interval, which is how you tell the browser to stop. So maybe I want to cancel this timeout after 3 seconds. Why would I want to do that? Well, if I have a toast and I show it for 2 seconds and then I get another toast, I don't want my toast to get cleared after 1 additional second. So if I like draw out the timelines here in a comment, so at second 00, we show first toast. And then after 3 seconds at second 03, we hide the toast. Well, what happens if at 02, I show a second toast? Well, this timeout is still executing from this first toast. And so after 1 second, it's going to immediately hide it, even though the second toast hasn't shown for its full 3 seconds yet. I would like after 05 instead to show or to hide the toast. So I need some way to cancel this when I get a new request for a toast, but there's one already there. So if my toast is already showing, I want to cancel the timeout and then reset it, set a new timeout from this show second toast here. And then that new timeout is going to wait 3 seconds and then we hide it. Is that clear what we want to accomplish here?
Mhm.
Okay, sweet deal. So with that said, what I want is a way to save this ID so that when I call show toast again, it can cancel whatever the previous ID is and then set a new timeout here. And I need some way to preserve that between renders of the component. And typically, what we'll do here is we don't want to trigger a re-render of the component when this timeout runs because nothing is happening. We're not setting a state variable when we're calling set timeout. We only want to update state if there's an actual like piece of data that causes our component to look different that changes. And this ID does not fit under that category. And so instead, what we want to use here is we want to call UseRef. So we're going to call this timeout ID ref, and we're going to call the UseRef hook. If I hover over here, it says it returns a mutable object whose current property is initialized, and you can give it an initial value. And the object will persist for the full lifetime of the component. It does not cause your component to re-render if you change the ref. So this is just some piece of data that you want to store in a component for the lifetime of the component, and it will not cause the component to re-render when I update it. If I have some piece of data that is not essential to the actual look of my component, but I do want to preserve it between renders, in this case, just an ID, then I want that to be in a ref rather than a use state. And so I'm going to give it null as my initial value. And then what we're going to do is when we set a new timeout, we're going to set my ref's current property to be the ID. So what is like actually happening here? I have a ref, which React is storing somewhere under the hood. I don't know where. And this ref is an object. And it has a property current, and in the current property is some piece of data, which I am starting as null to indicate there is no timeout running. That's my choice. I say that null in this case means to me that there is no timeout. You could start this as -1. You could start it as 0. If you wanted to store a string, you could use an empty string, whatever you want. I think this makes the most sense semantically for me. But what I want to do is I want to update this current property, not the whole object. I don't want to give this ref a new object because the way state works under the hood is my state is an object or a piece of data. And when that physical object changes and I get a new object, so this object has ID of 1 or some really long string. If I give it a new object that has a different ID, then state is going to say, this is a new object. I need to re-render my component. That's not what I want with a ref. I want it to have the same object. It just needs to hold a piece of data that is always going to be the same. Anytime my component renders, it's going to call UseRef, which just runs behind the scenes and grabs this object and returns it to me, whatever it is. By default, this is going to be null, and I can change this later to be the ID of my timeout, can change this to be a different ID, so on and so forth. And it will never cause my component to re-render. But if my component does re-render for another reason, like someone actually changed this other unrelated piece of state, it's going to give me that same object with the same current property. So how are we going to use that? Well, when I set a new timeout, we're going to say this is the timeout that's currently running. And then when that timeout is finished, we're going to set our current back to null, which is to indicate there is no longer a timeout running here. And how do we cancel it? Well, when I'm showing a toast, if the current value, I'm going to put this down here at the bottom actually, just so that makes a little more sense chronologically. If my showing property is true, which is to indicate there is already a toast running, actually, even better than that, we're going to say, is there a timeout that's currently running? Well, if timeout ID ref dot current is not null, which is what we chose to indicate that there is no timeout currently running. If it's not null, well, I'm going to cancel it. Cancel timeout, clear timeout, sorry. So we're going to clear whatever is in there. And then we could also set it back to null here if we want to. Maybe we do that just to be totally clear that it's going back to null. There's no longer a timeout running. And then we create this new timeout, which sets showing to false after 3 seconds and clears itself. And then down here, once we've done all that, we have our timeout ready to go. Now we actually go ahead and update the state, which will cause our component to re-render. So what does this look like? If I have my cart and I let it run for maybe 2 seconds and then I create a new toast, it should not immediately clear away. It should wait another 2 or 3 seconds. So let's do this. Let's prove that this works by logging inside of our timeout. Let's do date dot get seconds. And let's see if this looks like what we expect. So I have my toast. $38.11. Oh, right, because this is just executing once. It's not an interval. All right, so that's not going to work. But essentially what's going on here is we have our timeout. It waits for 3 seconds or so. 1, 2, 3, then it disappears. If I go 2 seconds and then hit another one, it should stick around for another 3 seconds after that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Sweet deal. And if I were to get rid of this like timeout clearing to go back to our previous bad state, since I don't think I fully demoed what that actually looked like. 1, 2, 3. It immediately goes away. I clicked it twice, so it should have stayed around for another 3 seconds, but it didn't. And so what we do here is we clear it out to indicate that we are now ready to start a new timeout, and it'll stick around for a lot longer. I can click this forever, and it'll just keep showing me toasts. All right. That is all that I wanted to cover for today. Another thing I would suggest doing here, just for anyone who's curious, is these strings are kind of arbitrary. These are just colors. I would put these as constants to make them clear what they represent. Success color is equal to this, and our warning color is equal to this. And then similarly, we do the same thing for error. And info color, which I don't think we're actually using anywhere in our site, but we could find a good place to use it. So these are now constants, and I'm going to use the constant anywhere I need to reference these colors. And to someone who's reading, it's just a little bit more clear that this is not like some arbitrary string. This is a handcrafted and handpicked constant value. It works exactly the same. It's just a little more clear to the reader what it actually represents. And that is the end of this class. I will stick around as always for questions. Feel free to ask as long as you need. For those of you who don't have any questions, feel free to drop off. Make sure you do the sign-in form before you leave, so I can submit attendance. And I'll post this recording as soon as I can. But for all of you who are dropping, thanks for sticking around. And for those of you with questions, definitely stay on for a little bit. I will repost the sign-in form for you guys, for anyone who's curious. All right. Any questions? No questions? All right. In that case, have a great weekend. I don't think that I will be holding a session next week. I think I will be unavailable. So next 2 weeks are going to be off from my Thursday sessions. So everyone have a great holiday season, and I will see you guys probably after the new year.